three-point line, sells his shot fake, and then puts his head down and attacks.
A lot of contact there. Curry for three.
Just recently, Steph Curry in an interview expressed his readiness to play 48 minutes per game.
I want to play 48 minutes. I'm always.
48 minutes. That's the whole game. This got me to thinking though, well, what if he actually did play every single minute of every single game? What would happen? I knew right away that figuring out all the details in such a crazy scenario would take a ton of digging, but I figured if I was interested in finding out this information, then so are you. So then this begs the question some of you might have. Has any player ever played 48 minutes per game for the entire season? For this, I did some fact finding, and as it turns out, playing the whole game was much more commonplace back in the early 60s, with players like Oscar Robertson, who in his first year played an average of over 42 minutes per game, eventually working his way up to 46 minutes a game in 1966. Bill Russell played over 45 minutes per game in 1962 for the Boston Celtics, as well as Elgin Baylor for the Lakers averaged over 44 minutes per game during that time. None of these players, however, hold a candle to one of the most dominant players to ever play the game, Wilt Chamberlain, who played for the Warriors back when they were based in Philadelphia, playing a staggering 48.5 minutes per game in 1962 as well. That means Wilt Chamberlain was playing every minute of every game plus overtime. The closest Steph Curry came to these numbers was in 2013, where he averaged just 38 minutes a game, much lower than anyone else on this list. So let's say Steph Curry suits up for the next game and Steve Kerr says, "You are not getting any subs, you'll only break his timeouts in between quarters and halftime." How would this affect the Golden State Warriors? And more importantly, how would it affect Steph? Now, Steph Curry already has 11 games in his career where he played 48 minutes or more. However, the statistics show Steph Curry averaging just 30 points per game. Oh yeah, 9 of the 11 games came in Steph's rookie year, a year in which he averaged just 17.5 points per game. More on that later on. So far this year, the league's leader in minutes played is Fred VanVleet of the Raptors with 38.5 minutes, followed by Jason Tatum with 37.2, another Raptor, OG Anunoby, in third, all the way down to Bradley Beal of the Washington Wizards with 36 minutes per game to round out the top 10. If we remove the two outliers in Steph's career, which are 2012 where he played only 26 games and 2020 where he only played 5, Steph played anywhere between 32 and 38.2 minutes per game. Even in the year Steph played the most minutes, going from 38.2 minutes per game to 48 minutes per game is a 26% minutes increase, which is essentially the equivalent of playing another entire hypothetical fifth quarter of basketball. With that calculation based on the fact that in order to play 38.2 minutes per game, Steph has to average 9.5 minutes per quarter for the first 4 quarters. This is to say that playing that many more minutes is a pretty big jump. The year Steph Curry played 38 minutes per game, he did this over a total of 78 games at the age of 24. If Steph had played 48 minutes per game instead of 38 that year, that would be the equivalent of playing an additional 20 more games for a total of 98 games in a regular season. An 82-game regular season would seem like 102 games, and this number only skyrockets for players who average less minutes per game, which is everyone in the NBA today with the exception of Fred VanVleet. This chart shows that after Wilt Chamberlain's minutes per game peaked in 62, the average minutes per game of the league leader in that category had been steadily falling up to and through the late 80s, bottoming out with the rise of the Michael Jordan-led Chicago Bulls. We then trend slightly upwards from the early 90s through the 2000s, and in the 2010s fell precipitously and bottoming out below 40 minutes per game with the rise of the Golden State Warriors before beginning to increase once again in 2019. What this means is that in response to players that define eras, Wilt, Jordan, and Curry, teams started loading up their key players on minutes in order to compete, and thus we see a rise in the number of minutes played by the league leaders. The exception here is Wilt, because, well, you can't play much more than 48.5 minutes per game on average, so yeah. Back in the earlier days of the NBA, you kept your best player on the floor for as long as possible, until they are absolutely winded and cannot move, or something like that. So with Wilt's minutes maximized, he was untouchable, playing the most minutes of any player in the league for a ridiculous 9 years out of the 12-year span he was on the charts. So how did this impact Wilt? Wilt played a total of 14 seasons in the NBA as a 7'1" big man, averaging 46 minutes per game over the entirety of his career. He played in a total of 1,045 games, averaging over 74 games per year. In the early part of the 1969 to 1970 season, just 9 games in, Wilt suffered a serious right knee injury which kept him from playing up until the last 3 games of the regular season. This was the only significant injury of Wilt's career. If we translated those minutes to today's numbers using one of today's best players, and let's say we chose a random player like, I don't know, Steph Curry for example, who's averaged just over 34 minutes per game. This would be the equivalent of Wilt playing a total of 1,395 games, which at just over 74 games per year would have Wilt playing a total of 17 seasons, an extra 4 years worth of minutes crammed into the 14 years he actually played. What about a player like Vince Carter, who is the longest tenured player in the NBA, despite only becoming an NBA player when he was 22? Vince played a total of 22 seasons in the league and averaged 30 minutes per game in 1,545 appearances. This is a lot less minutes per game than Wilt and even less than Curry. If we did the same thing we did earlier and translate that to the number of seasons that Carter would have if he played the same number of minutes per game as Steph Curry is playing right now, he would have played a total of 1,351 games, which is less than the number of games played overall by Wilt. So to make this simple and easier to digest, despite playing less seasons, a player like Wilt Chamberlain played even more minutes in his career than Vince Carter. So where does all this leave Steph Curry? If we're expecting Steph to keep up with 34.3 minutes per game for the rest of his career, this leaves 600 remaining games in Steph's career. Assuming hypothetically that Steph Curry will land somewhere between Vince Carter's 1,351 games and Wilt Chamberlain's 1,395. At his current rate of 64 games per year, this would mean that Steph wouldn't hit retirement for another 9 years. We're talking about 2030 here, fellas. This means Steph feasibly should be healthy enough to play until he's 42 years old. Now here's where it gets interesting. Let's say we want to bump Steph's minutes up to 48 minutes per game for the rest of his career. How many years have we got left? Bumping Steph's minutes would end up causing him to only be able to play an additional 429 games, which gives us another 6 years of Steph and him retiring from the NBA just after his 39th birthday. This, however, only applies if Steph Curry manages to stay healthy. Every additional 96 minutes played leads to an almost 3% increase in the risk of injury. That means, should we condense Steph's games by having him play them over 429 games instead of the 600, that's an additional 171 games worth of minutes, or an additional 14 minutes per game, which would increase the likelihood of injury by approximately 27% every year. This means that Steph's risk of injury would double over the next 4 years, and after 6 he'll likely be too burnt out to continue. This does not mean Steph is guaranteed to be injured by year 4, as we're simply calculating the risk. For example, if Steph gets injured once over the course of the next 4 years in his current regular career, then the doubling of the risk would mean that Steph would likely have gotten injured twice over that same period of elapsed time. If he somehow gets injured twice at his current rate, that would mean he'd likely get injured 4 times over the same time period if we increase the amount of minutes he plays. Of course, all this is probability, and Steph could go the entire period without getting injured, as risk is a factor that when multiplied by a number like 0, as in 0 injuries, the resultant is 0. And now for the part you've all so patiently waited for. What does this do for Steph's performance? Will we see more 50 or 60 point games? Does this mean more championships? Now this in particular is a bit tough to measure, as there are many underlying conditions that change for a player throughout their career that impacts the number of minutes played as well as their performance. When KD joined the Warriors in 2016, Steph Curry's numbers took a tumble, while his minutes fell only slightly. Steph's minutes after KD left went right back to where they were, and Steph's numbers actually got better than they were before KD. As the main scoring option without a second guy such as Klay, it makes sense his numbers went up, and they conceivably would have just gone back to pre-KD numbers had Klay not been injured. This, however, is slightly different, as we will have the same player, only the player spending more minutes on the floor and contributing, so this calculation will require factors based on the player's usage rates, where that player is in relation to their peak performance, and their total overall minutes on the floor. Last year, Steph Curry had a usage rate of 37.9%. In 2016, that would have been the runaway league leader in usage rates. However, it isn't 2016, it is 2021, and Steph's 37.9% just barely cracks the top 10 usage rate. Back in 2016, the highest usage rate was Russell Westbrook with 33.3%. Today, that record goes to Luka Doncic at 43.3% usage. That means almost half the time the ball is on the floor, it is in Luka's hands. Luka, however, has a very similar game to James Harden, and with his longevity in the league and with less variance, provides a lot more data points for analysis without having to eliminate further unknowns. If we look at Harden's usage rate chart, we see that his points per game increased his first 3 years in the league before it stabilized somewhat in the mid-high 20s before his usage rate took off. At this point, Harden's usage rate would increase and so would the points scored per game. Naturally, a player with the ball in his hands more will get more buckets. This got to the point where Harden was averaging up to 36.1 points per game in 2019 when he had the highest usage rate. So the evidence is spelled out right here for you that individual player performances do increase with increased time on the floor. Harden's 3-point percentage, however, suffered as a result of the increased shot attempts from distance, although his drives had the same level of success regardless of his usage rate. This, however, doesn't apply to Steph Curry. Steph's efficiency does not fall off with an increased usage rate, increased shot attempts, or increased minutes on the floor. What I find is that as long as he has the fitness to play the 48 minutes as he stated in the interview, Steph Curry would currently be averaging around 37 to 38 points per game instead of his current 27 points per game. And considering he's been in somewhat of a scoring slump, this number would be closer to 43 or 44 points per game, for example, if we use last year's scoring average. Now, it is absolutely true that Steph would have an increased risk of injury if he started playing 48 minutes. But with Steph Curry's efficiency not falling off with his increased usage, we're looking at an absolute all-time and rare superstar. Wilt put up the highest efficiency in the league for a number of years despite the extended minutes he played on the floor, and that's the type of impact we're seeing Steph Curry have with the Warriors. So proportionally speaking, the longer Steph Curry stays on the court, the more the Warriors' chances of winning increases all the way up to the full 48 minutes. The only holdback is that 27% increased risk of injury if he played 48 minutes a game for an entire season, which Coach Kerr would rather not risk for the sake of winning a championship when you could win it without putting that many miles on the Warriors superstar. Considering Steph Curry averaged just about 30 points per game in his 48-minute games during a year that he averaged 17.5 points per game overall, these numbers are not far-fetched whatsoever, as he'd easily put up these insane stats while blowing teams out. He'd be the clear leader for the scoring title, and he's already in the running for the MVP. He'd be that much further ahead. Not to mention where this would put Steph as an all-time player. For his longevity, Steph plays less minutes and thus will end up playing more seasons at a lower peak. Imagine Steph Curry averaging 30 points per game as a rookie and peaking at 45 points per game in his best years as a scorer, but only having about 14 seasons in the NBA. I'm sure some Warriors fans in an alternate universe somewhere got to witness that, and of that I am absolutely jealous. Let me know if you think Steve Kerr should play Steph Curry 48 minutes or not. I honestly wouldn't have a problem with it if it was once here and there if we know Steph will get a few days off. I'd rather not have a 27% increased risk of injury for the only guy we have that can undoubtedly lead Dub Nation to its next championship. Don't forget to subscribe to Switch Culture for more NBA content, and as always, till next time,
Word, I'm a player, the real player. I don't give a prayer, man. A naysayer, I block so hard, sweetie gets served. Call me Lonzo Ball, bitches get swerved.
Usually I don't get down with these girls, but tonight it's on my mind.